Great to be with you. I'm in Kentucky, Lexington this morning. I'm going to be preaching in about an hour and a half at there's a pastor's retreat, pastor's state convention, pastor's conference here, and I'll be preaching there. But I'm grateful to be with you. Love you guys very much and the work that you do. And I do it too. Even though I'm privileged to lead this team at the North American Mission Board of Replant, Revitalization, and Rural Ministry. Man, I spend a lot of my time one-on-one consultations with dying and declining churches. And I was in the midst of one last Monday and in Kansas City. And, I walked into this church, used to have about 200 in worship, right? It's in an inner suburban ring. So it's a place that in the 1960s was the suburbs of Kansas City. And today it's a very transitional neighborhood. So I walked into their pastor retired after 20 years. So I walked in there Monday evening. They'd like me to be their interim and turn things around, So I come in there Monday evening and meet with the search team, interim search team. And it's like, I told my wife, I said, man, I've seen this movie so many times. You walk in there and the building looks like 1987. One of the things they wanted their interim pastor to do was make sure he kept 2 or 3 hours a day of office hours because they still had a part-time secretary. And by the way, they average about 50 now in attendance. And they wanted to hire a young pastor in order to reach the neighborhood. And they had buku's problems. And here's the deal. They weren't even aware of their problems. And so when you talk about how do you bring revitalization to a declining church, man, the first thing is you realize they don't really know what their problems are. I mean, rather than this church I was with Monday night, and I don't know, I'll pray about it. I may step off the cliff and help them again. I may become their transitional pastor. But first of all, they're going to have to understand the situation they're in. And, Rainer's wonderful book, Anatomy of Revived Church, which is a great book. Obviously, the book, Autopsy of a Deceased Church is foundational. But his other book, Anatomy of a Revived Church, talks about how churches come back. And the first thing churches that come back and begin to revitalize, the first thing that happens, that has to happen, that's foundational, is they have to quit blaming anything else for their situation. And they have to own it themselves. And, this blessed church I was with Monday night, it's just that the neighborhood's changed and the young people have left and the young people are going to the more trendy churches, the seeker-friendly churches, and they're not seeker-friendly and they're very proud of that. They just aren't friendly. We're not seeker-friendly, so we're not going to compromise. And I said, yeah, they wanted their interim and their new pastor. They wanted Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And I said, well, how many come on Sunday night? No, 12 or 15 of us. All elderly. And I said, well, have you thought about maybe this might be a good chance to sort of, work at maybe not doing that? And they said, no, because we understand that churches that quit having Sunday night service seldom go back to it. So we don't want to quit because we might never go back to it. And again, it just goes back to the fact that the first thing you have to do is help them realize how deep a hole they're in and how they got there. And that's a hard thing to do because you can just feel it in the room. And I know I'm singing to the choir. You've all been there. It's like I was a consultant for First Baptist Church of Springfield, Missouri for 9 months. And I live about 3 hours from Springfield, Missouri, but I would drive down there sometimes once a week. And I Zoomed with the committee every week, sometimes twice a week. And this was a church that Springfield has a building that seats 1,000 and about 2 city blocks worth of building, and they average about 130. And their pastor retired, and they are financially not going to continue more than 2 or 3 years on the path that they are on. And so we went through the whole process of them being fostered by another church, and the vision team agreed to that. And so on a Sunday morning, they presented to the entire congregation the financial reality that if we continue for about 3 or 4 more years, we'll be completely underwater. We cannot continue. We don't have the money. We're losing too many members to death. We're not gaining any people. The expenses are going up. And they actually printed it off and passed it out on Sunday morning. And the finance chairman got up and basically said, we can't keep doing this. And the chairman of the vision team said, The only thing we can do is be adopted or fostered by this other church. And then they asked me to preach and just bring the whole thing home. We thought we did, but guess what? We didn't. And because the congregation just doesn't think it's that bad yet. And all they need is to find the right pastor. And if they find the right pastor, he can turn everything around. And what's happened is, whether it's a church of 30 people or 150 people that used to be 1,000, man, Satan has blinded their eyes and they don't even see the truth. And you know, you and I can step into that place and we can see the truth right there. We can see all the problems, all the systemic problems, but they don't see it. And it reminds me of a passage of scripture I refer to many times when we do this work. And it's back in the Old Testament, and it's in Genesis, and it's in chapter 26, where Isaac had to dig again the wells of his father Abraham that the Canaanites had stopped up. And look, guys, we have more Southern Baptist churches in North America than there are McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway combined. Let that sink in for a minute. McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway combined. Those are wells that at one time gave life-giving water to a land that was dry and thirsty. I mean, you just look around our country today, our nation today, and it is a spiritual desert, and people are dying for lack of living water. You want to ruin a country for your enemies, you stop up their wells. I mean, it's a desert. I mean, the Philistines knew, we just stop up these wells and there'll be no more water for the cattle. There'll be no more water for irrigation. There can be no life if there's no water. So they stopped up the wells. Satan knows that. Each of those, you know, I love normative sized churches. Guys, you don't have to, over half of our Southern Baptist churches will have less than 50 on Sunday morning. Over half. And you and I both know well over 95% will have less than 200 on Sunday morning. We are a convention of normative sized churches, and there's nothing wrong with that if those normative sized churches were truly living wells of living water in those dry and parched neighborhoods. But they're not. And the reason they're not is that over time, and often it doesn't happen quickly, but over many years, just like the church I was at Monday night, just like Springfield First Baptist in Springfield, Missouri, it's been decades that Satan has slowly over time filled up those wells and stopped up and caused that water to slow and slow until it's a trickle. And then eventually there's no water coming out at all. And that's when the church dies. And you know, you go to Reclaiming Glory and you'll see the 14 or 15 reasons, main reasons, the things that Satan uses to stop up the wells. You know, we choose our preferences over the needs of the unreached. We no longer want to pass true leadership to the next generation. We idolize the church as we experience it. And that's what all of these churches I've been consulting with, when I said I've seen the movie before, all of these churches I've been consulting with, they truly find their comfort and their security actually not in, and this is really, really hard to say because they would not see it this way, but ultimately they don't really find their comfort and security in the gospel and in Jesus. They find it in the church as they experience it. In a world that is changing so rapidly, they can't keep up with it. That everything in their life is changing. The way they shop, all, you know, I was at the mall the other day and Sears was closed and Penny's looks like it should close. It was terrible. I mean, the way we used to shop is gone. Everything's online now. We don't have landlines in our homes anymore. Everything's on the iPhone, and I keep getting this wanting to update my iPhone apps. And I just learned how to use the ones we got, and I don't want to come up with any more passwords for as long as I live. And you know, but there's one place, right, I can go to every week, and I can park in the same parking spot, walk in the same door, sit in the same Sunday school classroom, go to the same sanctuary, and I know what to expect. And that becomes a comfort to them. And Satan blinds their eyes so that actually becomes an idol. And so when you and I show up and say, hey, this church is on a trajectory that's not going to be good and it actually may close and we have to find some ways to make some change, their immediate response is, I can't take any more change. I don't want change. Just like I said, we want a pastor who's got 2 or 3 hours a day in the office. We want Sunday night and Wednesday night. We want the church to grow, but we don't want to see any of the change, and because they have laid down their primary love and affection for Jesus and embraced a primary love and affection for the church as they experience it. That is the real challenge that you and I, as mission strategists, consultants, people who work with declining churches, it's not going in there and telling them, hey, here's your neighborhood and here's what it looks like, and here's what your church looks like, and here's how you could reach people. It's, do you own the fact that you have made decisions that have got you in this place? As Henry Blackaby said, if a church dies, did it follow Jesus into the grave? Did Jesus not know what he was doing and it died? Of course not. At some point, they chose to stop following Jesus' plan and they chose to follow theirs, but only because Satan had convinced them that theirs plan was Jesus' plan. And so when you say, how do you reverse the decline? It has to first and foremost be a spiritual renewal, a spiritual revival. They have to come to the place, it's a gospel awareness that says this: it doesn't matter what I've done for this church in the last 40 years in terms of my salvation. Nothing I've done for this church, and I have, sometimes they're so entitled because they've been here so long, and rightfully so, they've done so much work. But none of that would buy them 1 minute outside of hell. The only thing that purchases their salvation is what Christ has done for them. And so when we begin the work of revitalization, it may take 6 months or a year of just preaching the gospel and opening their eyes to the fact that they owe everything to Jesus, and have them fall deeply in love with him. And to that extent, our team has just finished, David Jackson, working with Claude King, has just finished a new resource called Falling in Love with Jesus Again. Because we realize across North America, we're not going to see churches come back to life until saints fall back in love with Jesus and love him more than they love the church as they experience it. That's what we have to do first. And we do that by the preaching Christ in every message, gospel-focused preaching, Christ-centered preaching, not man-centered preaching, where Jesus is the hero of every story, not us, not our church. Obviously that. Gospel-centered conversations and discipleship. Look, guys, I'm not sure who said it first, but here's the reality. That's like when I walked into that church the other night. These saints have been in church all of their adult life. They have been to Sunday school, morning worship, Sunday night, Wednesday night, vacation Bible school, January Bible study. Like so many of our church members, they have a whole pantry of biblical knowledge, but they couldn't make a meal if their life depended on it. They don't know how to take all of that pantry and make it work in the church. And it's the most frustrating thing because they've never truly been discipled. We've just pushed information, and it doesn't live out in their life. Because if it lived out in their life, they would be saying on that Monday night I met with them, Pastor, what do we got to do to see people come to know Jesus? Because that's all that really matters. But that is not what they say. They say we want to see people come to know Jesus, but we also want to make sure we have Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. We have a pastor who spends 3 hours in the office every day. And we don't change the music. It's like, whoa, where did that's a lack of discipleship. So getting their hearts to warm back to Jesus. Every time I've done a revitalization, I've taken them through experiencing God again. I think that's foundational. And Richard has rewritten it with his son and got new videos. You can do the old version, you can do the new version, but I would encourage you to do it. And then obviously many of you know the resource that we worked with Richard and Henry on when I first came to NAM, which was flickering lamps. So we go through flickering lamps, Christ's purpose in his church. At the end of each chapter of flickering lamps, there's a video of Richard and Henry. It was the last video Henry ever did, where he speaks directly to that dying church and helps them understand this church belongs to Jesus. Guys, the task I was given was, how do we see churches revitalized? Look, you and I have a tremendous amount of information on strategies and ways to reach the neighborhood, ways to reach out to the community, ways to know your community. Rainer's got some good stuff on knowing your church, knowing your leadership, knowing your community. Those are all great things. But if the heart of the people do not change, there's not going to be any change. And so it is ultimately we have to pray specifically that their eyes will be opened, that the scales will be removed from their eyes, that their ears will be opened, they'll hear the Holy Spirit, their heart will be softened. There has to be a renewal and awakening. So we use Experiencing God, we use Flickering Lamps in this brand new resource. I believe it'll be shared with you this summer at the convention. David's been working on it with Claude King, Falling in Love with Jesus Again, a simple resource to help churches again refocus that attention on falling in love with him. That's what we have to do. It is a spiritual issue. It is spiritual warfare. It is a spiritual battle. There's no denominational guy in the world that can come up with a program to reclaim declining churches. It is spiritual warfare and a spiritual battle. But I will say this, we are seeing great progress. We are seeing many places, and many of you have experienced this, where there has been a breakthrough. And it hasn't been easy, but those churches that says, you know what, we are willing to pay the high price and to make the changes that need to be made and to lay down our preferences for the needs of the unreached and what Jesus wants. And here's the reality. After that happens, after a few months or a few years, those older people find joy they never had before because they don't show up at church every Sunday thinking somebody's going to take something away from them. They come to church every Sunday now excited about the children in the hallway and the new baptisms that we're going to have today. And they don't really even miss some of the old stuff that they thought they had to have. The best thing you can do for them in the last part of their life is get them to lay down that idol of the church as they know it and once again embrace the only thing that will bring them peace and contentment, which is Jesus Christ. And that's why I get up every day and do what I do. I don't do it to see churches come back. I do it because neighborhoods need fresh living water and because those older saints need to find joy that they once had that now they've lost so they don't live in fear. I hope that's been helpful. I usually take 2 days to teach all of that. It's hard to do it in 30 minutes, but you can check us out at churchreplanters.com. Most of you know where that is. We've got podcasts, comes out 2 or 3 a week on Revitalize and Replant, and then the Rural Podcast with Andy Addis, really focusing on rural ministry. And again, we're grateful for some of the new resources that we've got coming out that deal with the heart of believers. We've got to see revival and renewal in these dying churches. And if we do that, the rest will take care of itself. Jesus has a plan for every church. And every church, if they'll listen to Jesus, it'll be all right. We just got to help them understand who they're listening to and who they're not listening to. So any questions? I'll leave some time for some questions.
Yeah, that's all great stuff, Mark. I think that resource, Flickering Lamps, we've seen a church here in Montana down to 8 people go through that. And man, just in the course of weeks, the Lord just really began to help them think differently. And so what are some of that things in Flickering Lamps? And now they had 29 people 2 weeks ago and had actually a salvation. So they were really excited. But what are some of the questions that Flickering Lamps helps you ask instead of kind of your old way? How does it jar your thinking differently?
Yeah. Flickering Lamps is Jesus' purpose in his church, his plans for his church, his priority in his church, his provision in his church, his preeminence in his church. It's like Adrian Rogers could have preached it. I mean, it's like, everything starts with a P. But at the end of each chapter, Henry, and he was still living and writing at this point, Henry and Richard wrote specific questions. They are questions that churches have to answer. And I don't have the memory off the top of my head, but they're ultimately Henry Blackaby questions because they're questions like this. Is your church a church that truly cares for its neighborhood and its community? And then if yes, how has that happened in recent days? Mm-hmm. So it's those kinds of dig deep questions, not just do you believe all this stuff, but then how has that happened? And if it hasn't happened, why not? It's those kinds of deep questions. And I think there's one place in one of the videos where Henry, who's 80 or so in this video, and obviously struggling physically, looks in the camera and says something like, the last thing this church needs is your unprayed over opinion. What you and I want doesn't matter. It's what Jesus wants for this church. And so hopefully letting the Holy Spirit use someone of their own age, and many of them deeply still love and respect Henry and what he meant to them maybe in the early 1990s. So that's it. There's some evaluation questions at the end of each chapter that churches have to respond to that get right to the heart of the matter. And I think that's one of the best things about that. And also the new version of Reclaiming Glory, Lifeway asked us to update it so it has all brand new stories in it and some new statistics. But also at the end of each chapter of Reclaiming Glory now, there are, learning from Henry, we wrote the same kind of discovery questions. So if you take a church to Reclaiming Glory, now those kinds of discovery questions are at the end of each chapter.
Yeah, that's great stuff. You know, as Montana, the Renew Montana Network, we believe that, you know, for corporate renewal, there has to be personal renewal.
Yep.
So a lot of people put a great emphasis on like a 40-day prayer time, really making it personal. So as you begin to pursue Christ, pursue his community, pursue his commission, that's kind of the foundation. So just, we don't have a lot of questions in the chat, but talk about that personal renewal, how that is so important. Before things can change in your church, things have to change in you.
Yeah, I think, and there's another great resource that Claude King has written called Come to the Table. And every dying church has communion. Most of them are Southern Baptist churches and they have it once a quarter because they don't want to get too familiar with it. But nonetheless, they all have communion. And so one of the things that in talking to Claude King a lot about this, he suggests, he wrote this wonderful piece called Come to the Table, where you take several weeks to prepare to come to the table next time we have communion. And your church members, you know, if I went to this, and I may do this, if I go to this church I'm consulting with, if the Lord leads me there and I decide to do it, that's probably one of the first things we'll do. I'll say, when's your next communion? And well, it's 2 months away. Great. I'd like us to take the next 8 weeks, and part of our study, we're going, maybe we'll do it on Wednesday nights or Sunday nights since they want to meet then. There's this thing that Claude wrote on Come to the Table, where it really prepares their heart to commune with the Lord. And they'll be anxious to do that. They will like that. But what's happening there is we're hoping at that point that there is a spiritual renewal that takes in them, that they really understand what communion is and how important it is. And it involves confession and it involves submitting ourselves to him. And so you can do those kinds of things where you plug into what they're already doing rather than bringing something brand new, and try to make it better and make it more live and more real. So I would suggest also Claude's material on Come to the Table, which is a great preparation for the next communion service. And then maybe follow that up with Experiencing God, and follow that up with Flickering Lamps, and then just pray and get churches. Oh man, please get some churches in your community, get some churches in your association. Say, man, we will pray for that. We will pray for Coventry Estates Church. And man, have them. We cannot do revitalization without prayer. So develop a prayer strategy for that declining church that comes from outside, and let the declining church know, man, we got churches all across our association praying for you, praying for this church, and then get them to pray as well. Obviously, we say sometimes on Wednesday nights, if they still want to have prayer services and there's 8 or 10 of them that show up, move that prayer meeting on Wednesday night out of the sanctuary and go into the nursery, the preschool area where maybe there haven't been kids for years, and have your prayer meeting that Wednesday night in the nursery and pray that God will bring children to that nursery. Bring those people up on the platform on Wednesday night and have them look into the empty baptistry and have them actually pray over that baptistry that one day it'll be filled again. Have them come up on the platform and look out at the congregation, look out at the pews, and have them pray that those pews will, once they're there to seat people who need Jesus. Get them engaged in prayer, get them thinking away from themselves. And that's one of the ways you can do it. That way they're already coming on Wednesday night. So use the prayer time to help do that. They're already doing communion. So use that to prepare their hearts with this material that Claude has written. And then again, Experiencing God, Flickering Lamps, those kinds of things. And the new material that David's written on falling in love with Jesus again. Guys, that's what has to happen in order for us to see revitalization in declining churches. And that doesn't matter whether you're in the heart of the city or in the most remote rural area of Montana. Those things will work no matter where you are.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Appreciate all that insight, encouragement today. I think the work of our local associations is vital in helping them see how they kind of partner together with these struggling churches. Mark Halleck puts out a lot of good stuff talking about kind of helping the churches around you to be an encouragement and a blessing. And as you were talking about praying for them. And I think when we kind of strive side by side for the gospel together as churches, we see a lot of good things happening. So appreciate your ministry to us. And somehow we actually finished on time. So
Well, how could I
we'll
not listen to
we'll
those
pass
two
it.
other guys before me talk about time management? So, by the way, I
Way to
have
go, way to
none
go,
of that.
Mark.
I don't block. I don't have any time management. I just want you to know that. So there you go.
All right, well, we'll pass the baton to whoever's next.